Our, um, our next speaker is another one of the gang from U of C. His name is Dr. Peter Fascini. And Peter is a professor of plant biochemistry in the Department of Biological Sciences here at U of C. Peter, when we were getting together and chatting with a variety of speakers, was sort of at a bit of a loss for words of how to describe Peter. He said, well, just call me the drug dealer. Peter has a very, very unique area of expertise. Peter and his lab are one of only two places in the entire world that are studying poppies and opium. And he's brought some samples. Not those kind of samples. Wouldn't that be a good loot bag, hey? No, he's brought some poppy plants, and so he said, feel free to come up and take a look at them afterwards. No eating. But he's got, as I say, a world-leading lab here right in the U of C. I mean, who would have known that kind of thing is right here in our hometown? So Peter's going to talk a little bit about his work and some of the interesting adventures he's gone on in his research. So ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Peter Fascini.
Oh, I had a yellow light. Now it's, okay, here we go. I'll just hold on to this or put it in my pocket. Okay, well, again, I thank the organizers of the event for something that's interesting, more interesting on a Monday morning than what I normally do, and also for the opportunity to come and speak with you and to bring the true stars of the show over here. It's not me, it's the plants. Listening to Curtis, I think it's interesting to hear a chemist basically say, we found a way to do something better than the plant, because one of the things that I always say is that these guys are the best chemists in the world. So I guess both of us are trying to find ways of doing something better in some way than what nature does. I've been at the University of Calgary for almost 17 years, and in that period of time, as you heard, we're one of two labs in the world that is working on understanding how this plant makes pharmaceutical compounds like codeine and morphine. So I like to say it differently. I like to say we're number one, and in the back pocket I have this disclaimer that if we're not number one, then we're no worse than second best in the world. So I've learned a lot of things by working on a system like this. It's certainly controversial. As soon as you tell somebody what you work on, you get raised eyebrows, often a question of, is that legal? And the answer is yes, so I have a license. I'm, in fact, Canada's only legal grower of opium poppy, and that certainly is something that is valuable at dinners to tell people about what you do. I've also learned about things like branding. So I got into science. I was always interested in science as a kid, and really never thought about doing anything else. And actually went into science because I thought I could avoid things like money and lawyers and other things that people in the business world think a lot more about, like branding. So when you end up being branded as Dr. Feelgood, it's kind of hard to live down that particular moniker. Usually it's a positive thing, but certainly sometimes, again, it raises a certain amount of interest, for better or for worse, in terms of what you do. So I thought that what I would do today is, I'm not actually going to show a question, an if question, because in thinking about it, I was thinking, so what is my question? And realizing I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm not sure what I'm doing right at this moment, and I think that's pretty much describes every single day for me. I'm not sure what I'm doing, which is really the driving force behind all of the science and the pursuits that we've been embarked on. We don't know what we're doing, and we're trying to learn more. I think the other side of it is that I'm not sure if I want to put any of these if questions when the light bulb goes up or lights up over my head. I'm not sure I want to put it in writing. I'll tell it to you, and then if you tell anyone else this is what he said, then I still have an opportunity to deny it or to say that you took it out of context. So I'll start off for a few minutes just telling you my story and where I came from, and then I want to teach you something. So I'm on campus, and it kind of feels almost like Biology 233, first-year biology, with you out there sitting, nobody sitting in the front row. You're all sitting as far away as possible. So I'm going to teach you something. And you'll have this information to take away with you and tell other people and say, hey, did you know that? So that's one of the things that I think is a driving force for me. It's just certainly just learning about things. So I guess I describe myself, as a kid, I described myself as a scientific kleptomaniac. So what that means is that I was always interested in science. Whenever there was Christmas or a birthday, I was always asking for something, a kit or a microscope or something that had to do with science, whether it was chemistry or biology or physics or anything like that. And the good thing in those days, this was back in the early to mid-1970s, is that the regulatory agencies didn't seem to be as concerned about the safety of toys the way that they do today. So, you know, you could get a wood-burning set, for example. I'm not sure that I would buy any of my kids anything that involved burning wood as a pastime. This kind of, so the kleptomania part was that I was never excited enough by what you could get in a commercial science product. So in high school, when I first got into a laboratory as a high school student, I saw all this shiny equipment. And at one point, I got a key to the storeroom that had all the chemicals. And it was kind of a project where I was let in there to do certain things, and then they forgot about it for the rest of the time that I was in high school. So I used to take chemicals home with me. So, you know, riding home on the bus with a bottle of sulfuric acid, sort of juggling around like this. And I had my mother's old high school chemistry lab manual, and I was trying to reproduce experiments in what they called their downstairs kitchen, but what I called my laboratory. So I felt good being in that kind of environment, and went on and did an undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, and when I was done, I realized I was unemployed. So I started looking for a job, and the first job I was offered a few months later was at the zoo in Toronto. And they actually required somebody with a degree in biology to be a zookeeper. And it's a very interesting career, but after a few months I realized that not only did I not want to do that particular thing as a career, but I was in the African pavilion and I had all kinds of problems. Josephine, the female gorilla, was in love with me, and she was pregnant, and Charles the silverback was pissed off with me, and everybody thought, you know, I'm like, it wasn't me, I didn't do anything. So I almost had to leave. And I did what you do when you don't know what else to do in life. You go to grad school. So I became a graduate student and did my PhD again at the University of Toronto. And that's where I got into the field of medicinal plant biochemistry. So, you know, this isn't a matter of, you know, people will ask that. So, you know, why are you interested in this? What drew you to the opium poppy? Why are you in this field? I didn't pick this field. This field picked me, right? It was kind of the other way around. I had no idea what I wanted to do other than to sort of do what I did when I was a kid, and that was be in a lab and just investigate things and try to blow things up and things like that. And you know, I just went on from one situation to another, eventually finishing a PhD and moving on and doing postdoctoral work. And it was in 1992 that I ended up at the University of Montreal and started working as a postdoc in a lab. My advisor there, who's still a good friend of mine, he had a project that he proposed to me, and it was cloning a gene encoding an enzyme known as tyrosine decarboxylase. And at the time, cloning a gene was still a very difficult endeavor. And I asked him, I said, so does it matter what plant I clone this gene from? And he said, no, not knowing the consequences of that particular negative answer. So I came back the next day and I said, how about if I do this, if I clone the gene from opium poppy? And his initial reaction was throwing himself back in the chair, wiping his brow, and then taking a deep breath, and then, like any good academic, opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out a jar of opium poppy seeds. And he said, I just happen to have these opium poppy seeds here. And that's actually how it all began, and that was almost 20 years ago. And 20 years later, and as I say, 17 of those here at the University of Calgary, I think it's safe enough to say we're the world's leading lab in the world in this area. And as I say, I have a license, so a lot of interesting things happen in this field, working in this area. Certainly, just getting my license. I knew it was going to be interesting here in '95 when I started, and I contacted Health Canada. So initially, I didn't have a license in Quebec. I mean, it was Quebec, so you figure you don't really need a license to do things that are illegal. Coming to Alberta, I heard it was much more conservative. And I thought, well, I should contact Health Canada and get a license. And I did so, and the first question I was asked by this fellow in Ottawa when I said I'd like a license to grow opium poppy, and he said, so how many hectares do you plan to grow? My license still is for 100 plants. There's 6 of them here. There's 94 of them over in the greenhouse. So that's basically how things got started. And then you just pursue and you keep doing things. And I think those that are not familiar with how the research enterprise actually operates, it's not it's not quite as clean of an enterprise as sort of
Test, test.
and this one works. Okay, in the end, you end up discovering things and making it seem like you knew what you were doing, but you really didn't. So that's sort of the background to the story. I don't know that this particular endeavor would have gone so well if I hadn't have come to the University of Calgary. So the university has been very supportive. It's been an environment where I've been not only supported in pursuing it, but also it's been one that's been open to the new ideas and some of the radical thinking. But it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about things. It's not talking about energy. So if you're working on radically different technologies in Alberta and it doesn't involve energy, it involves drugs, that sort of raises a certain amount of interest and certainly some acknowledgement that this is something that could be pursued or should be pursued even to diversify the economy of the region, but something that will take initiatives that aren't in place the way they are, for example, in supporting energy. So with that said, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my favorite subject, and that is the opium poppy. And one of the things that is very exciting about working in this area as a scientist is that you sense your connection to history. Not only recent history, but history that goes back to the beginning of human civilization. So opium poppy was being cultivated. In other words, it was being grown the way that people grew wheat or rice or corn many thousands of years ago. It was domesticated very early, and you can see on this slide here some fossilized poppy capsules that were found in archaeological digs in these vases that date back over 6,000 years. And moving forward through history, the Abers Papyrus is the first recorded use of opium poppy as a medicine, and this dates back to ancient Egypt. Similarly, in Greece, in Crete, about the same period, a few hundred years later, there's these very interesting poppy capsules on the crown of this poppy goddess. Europeans were a lot slower in adopting these kinds of medicines in more controlled ways. So you have to go to the early Renaissance to find writings, the canon of medicine from European sources that describe the use of opium poppy for medicinal purposes. These are some of the interesting labels that go back to the late 19th century. So the top one there, if you can't read it, it says "Joy to the World," so you can imagine what's in there. The bottom one is my favorite, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. You can't see it at the bottom very clearly probably, but it says "For children teething." So those of you that have kids, you'll appreciate when I say it's unfortunate that this product is no longer available. The bottom there is heroin. So the connection between heroin and this plant is not clear to most people. The plant does not make heroin. The plant makes morphine, and morphine is converted to heroin very easily, and I'm going to show you how to do that in just a few moments. Heroin was synthesized 1 year before aspirin was marketed in 1898. So aspirin was put on the market by the same company that made heroin, the Bayer Chemical Company. And heroin was first marketed as a cough suppressant. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. But it's fair enough to say that this plant continues to be our most important medicinal plant. There are a large number of medicinal compounds that are very widely prescribed, extensively used for the management of pain in particular, but also for other purposes. So some of them you can see just going from the top right-hand corner, morphine and codeine that come from the plant itself, and then others that are semi-synthetic. So in other words, this molecule down near the bottom there, thebaine, which is produced by the plant and is converted semi-synthetically to compounds such as oxycodone, which many people are familiar with. If you've had Percocet after any kind of minor surgery, that's got oxycodone in it. Buprenorphine and many others as we move around this particular slide. So again, the only source for these for these compounds is the plant. And the reason for that is because of the complexity of the structures. So chemists can make these things, but the yields are not within an economical range. This map here is my version of the good guys and the bad guys. This is a dual-use technology, just like any technology that's developed, even if it's something as simple as cultivating a plant. It can be put to good uses, it can be put to the wrong uses. So those countries in green are those that are producing opium poppy legally, and those that are in red are producing it illegally. So the #1 producer in the world right now is Australia. And you can see that in Australia, I'm being a little bit unfair to the Aussies because it's not the whole continent that's growing opium poppy. It's actually just the island of Tasmania to the south. And you can see they use modern agricultural practices in the same way that we would grow canola or wheat here. This young lady is harvesting opium in the more traditional means, or by the more traditional means. I can show you that afterwards if you want to see it. We'll lance a few capsules, and although you can't sample it, you can at least say that you harvested opium at this event. These fellows, this is what's going to happen. These fellows in India is a major producer, and they're still producing opium in a more traditional way. So these fellows in the middle are stirring up some of the latex that comes from the plant. It oxidizes, it dries, and this guy here is rolling a loaf of opium. You can see that he's doing it entirely without the assistance of gloves. So you can imagine his job satisfaction rating is going to be a lot higher than mine is. Your bagels, if you had bagels with poppy seeds on them, those are opium poppy seeds. So again, an interesting reality of the law. If you have the seeds, even though some of them will still germinate if you throw them into your garden, that's not illegal because the seeds are considered food. But as soon as they germinate in your garden, you're breaking the law. Okay, so this is how you make heroin out of morphine. You need some morphine, and you need a compound known as acetic anhydride. In places that grow opium poppy, it's harder to get the acetic anhydride than it is to get the morphine. So you can see the difference between heroin and morphine is a couple of acetyl groups, basically just the same thing that is in white vinegar, added to the molecule, and that's the only difference between the two of them. Heroin, as I said, was first synthesized by the Bayer Chemical Company and marketed as a cough suppressant. It was taken off the market about 5 years later because there were almost 1 million heroin addicts in the United States. That's the bad news. The good news is none of them had a cough. And of course, the problems with it, the graph there on the bottom left-hand corner is interesting. Heroin is the red dot at the top. So in terms of harm and dependence, it's one of the worst things, if not the worst things, that is out there. But again, you have this dual-use technology where on the one hand, we can't live without the plant. On the other hand, we have to manage some of the difficulties or problems that are associated with it. So what's happened in the last 20 years? Well, you don't have to go through that part of the slide on the left-hand side. That's the pathway from a simple amino acid in the plant known as tyrosine. It's in us as well, and how the plant converts using almost 15 different genes and enzymes that are encoded by these genes, how it converts that simple molecule into codeine and morphine that are at the bottom on the right-hand side of that chemical scheme. So we've got almost the entire pathway cloned at this point. We're on to the last couple of enzymes or last couple of genes at this stage. So one of the interesting things that we're doing now is moving, now that we have all those genes available, we're moving all of those genes from the plant into a microorganism. And this is opening up sort of the brave new world of what's known as synthetic biology. If you say synthetic biology to most people, you say, synthetic biology, are you afraid of that? And they say, I don't even know what that is. Well, there's many different definitions of that, but this is sort of one of those, and that is turning biology into an engineering field. Having the parts and having the chassis that you need in order to manufacture things using biological systems in controllable ways. So we can get to the point, or we hope to get to the point shortly, where we have a common organism like baker's yeast that is capable of producing morphine. And that's got the regulators at Health Canada sort of scratching their heads, wondering how are they going to regulate that? Is that a controlled substance or not? So just in the last minute here, just to show you that it's not all about opium poppy. There are other interesting drugs that you can study and that have similar potential to perhaps create a pharmaceutical industry in the province. This is something that is missing here, but I think the technology base is available in order to move forward in this particular type of endeavor. Here's a couple of plants that we've started working on in the last couple of years. Ephedra, that many people know. This is Mao Wang, and it's used in Chinese medicine extensively and produces compounds that are in your decongestants like Sudafed and so on. Catha edulis is a plant known as COT and is right now actually the #1 most intercepted drug at Canadian airports. And the reason for that is that it's chewed by people that come from many cultures in Northeast Africa and the Middle East. And you can see these fellows here in this picture are chewing COT because it contains a compound known as cathinone. And cathinone is a very mild stimulant. And since it's completely illegal in Canada, and Health Canada, I guess, learned their lesson by giving me a license to work on opium poppy, they're actually being much more diligent now about issuing a license to work on ephedra and cat. So if you can't work on those plants or experience those plants where you are, what you do is you go where the plant is and where it's legal to actually see what happens if you chew this stuff. So this is from this past summer in Israel, where it's not illegal to possess or to chew cat. So there's a cat bush in the background. So I pretty much chewed that entire bush, and nothing happened. So anyway, that's my story. Thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to speak with you and answer any questions later.